The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret, a sterile prison where my lies took root. I stood by the window, watching rain streak the glass, while Julian Kane lay in the bed behind me, his breathing steady but his mind a fractured puzzle. He was my enemy, my rival, the man who'd spent years tearing down everything I built, yet here I was, claiming to be his lover. And he believed me. My name is Ezra Brooks, 28, a graphic designer scraping by in Portland, Oregon. Julian, also 28, was the golden boy of the local art scene, a painter whose work commanded galleries while mine lingered in obscurity. We'd clashed since college's sharp tongue and effortless charm always outshining my quiet grit. He'd mock my sketches, steal my ideas, and once, in a crowded gallery, he'd called my work derivative loud enough for everyone to hear. I hated him. So why? When the doctor told me he'd woken from a coma with no memory of his life except my name, did I lie? It started as a whim, a reckless impulse born from exhaustion and spite. The accident a drunk driver slamming into Julian's car on the 405 had left him with retrograde amnesia. He didn't know his own name, his family, or his art. But when he opened his eyes, groggy and lost, he'd whispered, "Ezra," like I was his lifeline. The doctor asked if I was close to him. I could have said no. I could have walked away. Instead, I said, "I'm his boyfriend." The words felt like a blade, sharp and dangerous, but I couldn't stop. Now, 3 days later, Julian's hand reached for mine as I stood by his bed. His hazel eyes, once cold and mocking, were soft, searching. "Ezra," he murmured, voice hoarse from disuse. "Why didn't you tell me we were together sooner?" My stomach twisted. I forced a smile, my heart pounding like I'd just committed a crime. "Didn't want to overwhelm you," I lied, squeezing his hand. His grip was warm, too real, and I hated how it made my chest ache. Portland's autumn rain battered the hospital windows as I sat beside him, spinning stories of a relationship that never existed. I told him we'd met at a coffee shop, that he'd spilled latte on my sketchbook and laughed it off. I described dates we never had hiking in Forest Park, kissing under the street, John's Bridge. Each lie built a fragile house of cards, and I was terrified it would collapse. But Julian listened, his face lighting up with every detail, as if my words were stitching his broken world back together. "Why don't I remember?" he asked, frustration creasing his brow. I swallowed hard, dodging the question. "The doctors say it'll come back slowly. Just trust me." He nodded, and the weight of his trust felt like a noose. When they discharged him, I had no choice but to take him to my cramped apartment in southeast Portland. My roommate, Lila, a 26-year-old barista with a penchant for chaos, raised an eyebrow when I explained the situation. "You're playing house with your nemesis," she whispered, smirking. "This is gonna blow up in your face, Ezra." I ignored her, but her words echoed in my head as Julian wandered my living room, studying my sketches pinned to the walls. "These are amazing," he said, tracing a charcoal drawing of the Columbia River Gorge. His voice was earnest, devoid of the sarcasm I'd known for years. "Did I ever tell you that?" I froze. Julian Kane, praising my work. "No," I muttered, turning away to hide the flush creeping up my neck. "You didn't." That night, he insisted on sleeping on the couch, but not before pulling me into a hug. His arms were strong, his scent a mix of hospital soap and something distinctly him. "Thank you for being here," he whispered. I stood rigid, guilt clawing at my insides. This wasn't real. None of it was. But as he held me, I wondered if I was lying to him or to myself. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and Julian sketching at my kitchen table. His hands moved with the same precision I'd envied for years. But the lines on the paper were softer, less calculated. "It's you," he said, showing me a half-finished portrait of my face, my eyes rendered with a warmth I didn't recognize. I don't know why, but I feel like I've drawn you 1,000 times. My breath caught. Had he? Or was this his mind grasping for something to fill the void? I took him to the waterfront that afternoon, hoping the city's pulse would jog his memory. We walked along the Willamette River, the skyline shimmering under a rare break in the clouds. He asked questions about our first date, about my favorite songs, and I spun more lies, each one heavier than the last. But when he slipped his hand into mine, his fingers lacing through my own, I didn't pull away. His touch felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. By evening, we sat on a bench overlooking the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. Ezra, he said, his voice low. I don't know who I was before, but I know I want to be with you now. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine, tentative and warm. My heart raced, torn between guilt and a dangerous spark I couldn't name. I kissed him back, just for a moment, before pulling away. We should take it slow, I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, but his eyes held a quiet determination that scared me more than my lies. As we walked home, I realized I was in too deep. Julian wasn't just my nemesis anymore, was becoming something else entirely. And I didn't know how to stop it. Days turned into weeks, and the lie grew roots, tangling around my life like ivy. Julian settled into my apartment, his presence both a comfort and a curse. Every morning, he'd greet me with a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through Portland's endless gray. And every night, I'd lie awake, haunted by the truth. I told myself this was temporary, a twisted game to unravel Julian Kane's arrogance. But his warmth was dismantling me instead. Lila, ever the skeptic, watched our strange domesticity with growing unease. You're falling for him, aren't you? She asked one evening, tossing her dyed pink hair as she chopped vegetables for dinner. I scoffed, scrubbing dishes harder than necessary. He's still Julian. This is just pity. But her knowing look cut through my denial. Pity didn't explain why my pulse quickened when he laughed, or why I'd started sketching him in secret, capturing the curve of his jaw in charcoal. Julian was relentless in his affection, as if my lie had unlocked a version of him I'd never known. He'd leave notes on my fridge, missed you at breakfast. Coffee's on me tomorrow. And cook terrible pancakes that we'd eat anyway, laughing over the mess. He'd ask about my art, my dreams, my fears, and I found myself answering honestly, stripping away years of guarded resentment. It was disorienting, like hating a ghost only to find it was never real. But cracks were forming. At a local gallery event, I brought Julian along, hoping exposure to his old world might spark something. The art crowd swarmed him, their faces a mix of pity and curiosity. A woman named Mara, a 30-year-old curator with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, pulled me aside. You and Julian, she said, arching a brow. I never saw that coming. He used to talk about you, but not like that. Her words hit like a warning shot. What had he said about me? I brushed it off, but unease gnawed at me. Later, Julian wandered the gallery, studying paintings with a childlike wonder that broke my heart. Did I make these? He asked, standing before a canvas of vibrant blues and golds. Unmistakably his. I nodded, throat tight. You are incredible. He turned to me, his eyes searching. Then why do I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time? I had no answer, only guilt. That night, he kissed me again, this time with a hunger that caught me off guard. We were on my couch, a half-empty bottle of wine between us, the room lit by a single lamp. His hands cupped my face, and for a moment, I forgot the lie, lost in the heat of his touch. But when he pulled back, his expression shifted. Ezra, he said, voice low, why do I feel like there's something you're not telling me? My blood ran cold. I mumbled something about the accident, but his gaze lingered, heavy with doubt. The next day, I took him to Powell's books, thinking the stacks might distract us both. He wandered the aisles, pulling out novels and reading passages aloud, his voice warm and animated. But when he found a dog-eared art magazine with his name on the cover, he froze. "This is me," he said, tracing the headline, "Julian Kane, the Future of American Art." He looked at me, confused. "Why didn't you tell me I was this?" I stammered, caught off guard. "I didn't want to push you." He frowned, unconvinced, and I felt the house of cards tremble. That evening, we walked through Laurelhurst Park, the air crisp with fall. Julian was quiet, his usual warmth dimmed. "Ezra," he said finally, stopping by a pond where ducks glided silently. "I keep seeing Flash's arguments. Galleries. You. But they don't feel like love. They feel like anger." My heart sank. His memories were clawing their way back, and I wasn't ready. "Maybe you're mixing things up," I said, my voice thin. He looked at me, his eyes piercing. "Or maybe you are." I couldn't sleep that night. The lie was unraveling, and with it, the fragile connection we'd built. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess and let the chips fall. But the thought of losing him, of losing this version of him, stopped me cold. Instead, I doubled down. I planned a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, hoping distance from the city would keep his memories at bay. "A getaway," I told him, forcing a smile. "Just us." He agreed, but his eyes held a question I couldn't answer. As we packed, Lila cornered me in the kitchen. "Ezra, this isn't a game anymore," she said, her voice low. "You're breaking his heart in yours." I brushed her off, but her words clung to me like damp fog. I was drowning in my own lie, and Julian was the only thing keeping me afloat. The Oregon coast was wild and unforgiving, waves crashing against jagged cliffs as if trying to tear the world apart. Julian and I stood on a lookout near Cannon Beach, the wind whipping through our jackets. He looked alive here, his blonde curls dancing in the breeze, his hazel eyes reflecting the stormy sea. I'd hoped this trip would anchor us, but his silences were growing longer, his questions sharper. "Tell me about the first time we kissed," he said, leaning against the wooden railing. The carved signpost nearby, "Love Finds a Way," felt like a cruel taunt. I spun a story about a rainy night in a Portland dive bar, our hands brushing over a shared drink. He listened, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "It sounds perfect," he said, voice flat, almost too perfect. My stomach churned. He was slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on. Back at the cabin, we sat by a crackling fire, the ocean's roar a distant hum. Julian sketched in a notebook I'd bought him, his hands moving with a quiet intensity. I watched, mesmerized, as he drew me again, this time with a shadow in my eyes, like he could see my guilt. "You're different here," he said, not looking up, less guarded. "Why is that?" I shrugged, my throat tight. "Maybe it's the sea." He didn't buy it. The next morning, we hiked through a Cola State Park, the forest dense with moss and mist. Julian was quieter than usual, his steps deliberate. When we reached a cliffside overlook, he stopped, staring at the horizon. "I had a dream last night," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We were fighting. You hated me. Ezra, why would I dream that?" My heart pounded. "Dreams don't mean anything," I said, too quickly. He turned to me, his gaze cutting. "Don't they?" I tried to change the subject, pointing out a seal bobbing in the waves below. But Julian wasn't done. "I see you in my head all the time," he said, stepping closer. "Not just happy moments. Angry ones. Like we were enemies." My mouth went dry. I wanted to confess, to spill everything, but fear glued my lips shut. Instead, I kissed him, hard and desperate, hoping to drown his doubts. He kissed me back, but when we parted, his eyes were clouded with suspicion. That night, back at the cabin, things unraveled. Julian found an old sketchbook in my bag, one I'd forgotten to hide. It was filled with drawings from college, including a caricature of him, all sharp angles and smug smirks, captioned "The Great Julian King." He held it up, his face pale. "What is this?" he demanded. I scrambled for an explanation. "Just old art. A joke." But he wasn't laughing. "This doesn't feel like love, Ezra. This feels like hate." I tried to salvage it, spinning a half-truth about how we'd started as rivals but fell for each other. He listened, his jaw tight, but I could see the doubt taking root. "I want to believe you," he said, voice breaking, "but I don't know if I can." He slept on the couch that night, and I lay awake, the weight of my lie crushing me. The drive back to Portland was silent, the air thick with unspoken questions. When we got home, Lila was waiting, her eyes wide with concern. "You okay?" she whispered as Julian disappeared into the bathroom. I shook my head, unable to speak. The truth was clawing its way out, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it buried. The next day, Julian announced he wanted to visit his old studio. I hesitated, knowing it could trigger more memories. But he was insistent. The studio, a loft in the Pearl District, was a shrine to his past, canvases stacked against walls, paint-splattered floors, and photos pinned to a corkboard. He wandered the space, touching everything like it was a foreign country. Then he found a letter, tucked inside a sketchbook. It was from me, written years ago after a particularly brutal argument. "You'll never understand what it means to struggle, Julian. Stay out of my way." He read it aloud, his voice shaking. "This is you, isn't it?" I nodded, my chest tight. "We had a fight. It was a long time ago." He stared at me, betrayal in his eyes. "Why do I feel like you're still lying to me?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. For the first time, I saw the old Julian, the one who'd cut me down, with a glance flickering beneath the surface. And I knew I was running out of time. The lie was a house of cards in a windstorm, and I was the fool who'd built it. Julian's questions grew sharper, his trust in me fraying like an old rope. Back in Portland, he spent hours in his studio, piecing together fragments of his past. I watched from the sidelines, torn between wanting him to remember and dreading the moment he did. One evening, he came home with a painting, a half-finished canvas of two figures, one with my dark hair, the other unmistakably him. "I started this before the accident," he said, his voice low. "It's us, isn't it?" I stared at the canvas, the figures locked in an embrace that felt too real. Had he been painting me even then, when we were enemies? "Maybe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't push, but his silence was louder than words. Lila, ever the voice of reason, cornered me again. "Tell him, Ezra," she said, her eyes fierce, "before he figures it out and hates you for it." I wanted to, but every time I looked at Julian, his soft smiles, his unguarded touches, I faltered. The lie had given me something I'd never had, him, and I wasn't ready to let go. Then came the gallery opening. Mara, the curator, had invited Julian to showcase his old work, hoping it would jog his memory. The gallery was packed, the air buzzing with pretension and wine. Julian stood by his paintings, a stranger in his own life. While I hovered nearby, my nerves frayed. A man approached us, Cole, 32, a sculptor with a beard and a knowing grin. "Julian Kane," he said, clapping Julian on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see you with Ezra Brooks. You two used to be at each other's throats." Julian's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" Cole laughed, oblivious to the bomb he'd dropped. "You guys were rivals, always bickering over who was the better artist. Didn't think you'd end up together." I tried to steer the conversation away, but Julian's eyes locked on mine, cold and searching. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my throat dry. It was a long time ago. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. At home, He sat on the couch, staring at the painting he'd brought from the studio. "Why didn't you tell me we were enemies?" he asked finally, his voice raw. I sank to my knees beside him, desperate. "Because it doesn't matter anymore. We're different now." He shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I don't know who we are, Ezra. I don't know who I am." The next day, he went back to the studio alone. I stayed home, sketching to calm my nerves. But every line turned into his face angry, hurt, lost. When he returned, he was carrying a box of old sketchbooks and letters. "I found these," he said, his voice flat. "They're full of you. Not love letters. Arguments. Competitions. You hated me." I tried to explain, but he cut me off. "Did you ever love me, Ezra? Or was this all a lie?" I froze, the truth clawing at my throat. I care about you," I stammered. It wasn't a lie. Not anymore. But it wasn't enough. He stood, grabbing his jacket. "I need space," he said, and walked out. The door slammed, and I sank to the floor, the weight of my deception crushing me. For days, he stayed at a friend's place, leaving me in a limbo of guilt and longing. Lila tried to comfort me, but her words felt hollow. "You did this to yourself," she said, not unkindly. I knew she was right. I'd built a fantasy, and now it was crumbling. Then, a week later, Julian called. His voice was shaky, urgent. I remembered something. He said, "Meet me at the studio." I raced across town, my heart pounding. When I arrived, he was standing by the painting of us, his eyes red. "I remembered us fighting," he said, "but I also remembered wanting you." Even then, my breath caught. "What does that mean?" I asked. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "It means I don't know what's real, but I know I don't want to lose you." We stood there, inches apart, the truth hanging between us. I wanted to confess, to lay everything bare, but his hand found mine. And for the first time, I wondered if the lie had uncovered something true. The studio smelled of turpentine and possibility, a fragile space where truth and lies collided. Julian stood before me, his hand still in mine, his eyes searching for answers I wasn't sure I could give. "Tell me the truth, Ezra," he said, his voice steady but raw. "All of it." My heart pounded, but I knew I couldn't run anymore. The lie had carried us this far, but only the truth could set us free. "I lied," I said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. "We weren't together. We were rivals. I hated you for years, your talent, your confidence, the way you always won. When you woke up and only remembered me, I told the doctor I was your boyfriend because, I don't know, I was angry, maybe, or curious. But then I saw you, really saw you, and I couldn't stop." My voice cracked, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Julian. I never meant to hurt you." He stared at me, his face unreadable. For a moment, I thought he'd walk away, and I braced for the end of whatever we'd become. But then he laughed, a soft, broken sound. "You're an idiot," he said, stepping closer. "But so am I. Because even now, knowing that, I still want you." He kissed me, fierce and desperate, and I kissed him back, pouring every ounce of guilt and hope into it. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Julian's memories came in fragments, arguments we'd had, galleries we'd shared, moments where our rivalry had sparked something deeper. He remembered hating me, but also watching me, sketching me in secret, wanting me even when he couldn't admit it. Maybe we were always more than enemies, he said one night, lying beside me in my apartment. I traced the lines of his face, my heart full. Maybe we just needed a second chance. We rebuilt slowly, no longer bound by lies, but by something real. I showed him my old sketches, the ones I'd hidden out of shame, and he showed me his drawings of me, even from before the accident, proof that I'd always been in his orbit. We fought, Sometimes, our old rivalry flaring. But now it ended in laughter or kisses instead of venom. One evening, we returned to the coast, to the cliff where we'd stood weeks before. The sunset was just as golden, the wind just as wild. Julian took my hand, his grip firm. "I don't know who I was before," he said, "but I know who I am with you." He pulled out a small canvas, a new painting of us 12 figures, no longer fighting, but standing side by side against the sea. On the back, he'd written, "Love finds a way." I realized then that the lie, as cruel as it was, had been a bridge to something true. We weren't perfect, our past was messy, our future uncertain, but we were honest now. And that was enough. As the waves crashed below, I kissed him, not out of guilt or fear, but because I loved him, and he loved me back. Portland welcomed us home, its rain and light a backdrop to our new beginning. Lila, ever the cynic, grinned when she saw us together. "Told you it would blow up," she said. "But damn, you made it work." We laughed, and for the first time, I felt free. Julian's art flourished, his new work infused with a rawness that drew crowds. I found my own voice, my sketches gaining traction in galleries that once overlooked me. We weren't rivals anymore, but partners in art, in life, in love. The past was a scar, but it was ours, and we wore it proudly. As we stood together at a gallery opening months later, Julian's hand in mine, I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man I'd hated, the man I'd lied to, the man I'd come to love. "No more lies," I whispered. He smiled, his eyes warm. "No more lies," he promised. And in that moment, I knew we'd found our way, not despite our past, but because of it.